My name is Michelle Ferguson, and I am with Raftellus. I am an external consultant. I'm not a city employee. I am with a consulting firm that was hired by the city to help facilitate this process of gathering input and working with the city council as they develop and review their strategic plan and develop strategic priorities going into the future. We thank you very much for being here this evening with us. With me this evening are two of my Raftellus colleagues, Kelsey Engelking. She will be helping us on the technology side, and Julie Giesecke, who is a graphic facilitator who will be graphically capturing some of the conversation this evening. But before we get into the meat of our conversation, I want to turn it over to Scott Tesh with the city. Scott.
Thank you, Michelle, and good evening to everyone. My name is Scott Tesh, and I work in the city's Performance and Accountability Office, and one of my duties is helping to administer the city's strategic planning process. On behalf of city staff, I just want to say thank you to everyone for taking time out of your evening. We have more than 100 registered participants for this event, and we are very excited when we get that many people to engage with us. This meeting is obviously an open meeting to anyone who wanted to register, but it is one in a series of meetings designed to obtain input from various stakeholders throughout the community. There are several focus groups related to the local economy, nonprofit sectors, healthcare, education, and community leaders. The information that will be gathered this evening will be shared with the City Council as part of their upcoming strategic plan workshop that will take place at the end of the month. Just a little background, the city looks at doing a new strategic planning process about every 4 years. It does an update, usually the midterm at the 2-year cycle. When we do this, we want to go out and we want to get as much feedback and input as we can from the community, so the City Council has that context when they go into their meetings. So we'll be using this information along with data from the resident survey to really help guide and steer part of the conversation during that 2-day workshop that they have later. I don't want to take any more time away from Michelle, so I will turn it back over to her, let her go through how this event is going to take place. And again, I just want to say thank you to everyone for taking time this evening to engage with us.
Thanks, Scott. And thanks again, everyone, for being with us this evening. So in a virtual environment, we do things a little bit different, but after nearly a year, I think, of living in this new reality, I think many of us are very well versed in how these virtual meetings go. Tonight, we do have a series of questions that we would like your input on. We are going to be breaking you into groups, sending you into breakout rooms, given the size of the group, so that you all can have some more intimate conversation around some of these questions. And then we'll be bringing you back into the large group for us to have some conversation around those questions. But because we're in a virtual environment, there are a couple of meeting reminders that we would just like to share with each of you and remind all of you of. We ask, if possible, if you could put your name in your Zoom box so we can call on each other, and again, you can engage in conversation, particularly when you're in your smaller groups. We ask that you stay muted if you are not speaking. Really helps minimize the background noise and allows us to hear whoever is speaking. If possible, particularly when you're in your small groups, we ask that you turn your camera on just so you can meet with and talk with your neighbors. We also ask that you offer each other and us a little bit of grace in this technology world. I know even after a year of doing this, I sometimes still can't find the mute button or the unmute button. You think we'd figure it out after a year, but I had trouble doing that earlier today. And then finally, I want to remind everybody that this is about your input and your voice. And as part of this, all perspectives are valid. And so when you are engaging in conversation in your small groups, the purpose is not to achieve consensus. We're not trying to agree or achieve agreement on any particular issues. We want to hear the various perspectives that each of you as stakeholders in the Winston community bring to this conversation. Because we're in a large group, we won't have the opportunity for every single person in this conversation to speak. However, there are a number of opportunities for you to provide input, particularly by using the chat feature of Zoom. We will will be collecting all of the input that comes in throughout the chat feature, and we'll also be providing an email address. So if there are things that you think of after today that you didn't get a chance to say or didn't have the opportunity to talk about, we welcome that input throughout the process too. And so we'll give you that information later in our conversation tonight. In terms of guidelines for the breakout rooms itself, in just a moment, we're going to send you through the magic of Zoom into some smaller group conversations. And when you get to those rooms, we ask that you begin by introducing yourself to your neighbors, just sharing your name and perhaps maybe how long you've been in the Winston-Salem community. And then we ask that you designate a scribe or a recorder of your group, someone who can perhaps take some notes and capture some of the key themes of your conversation. Again, like I said before, the purpose of this is not to achieve consensus, but to hear all perspectives, and all perspectives are valid in this conversation. And so even if perhaps you don't share the perspective of some of your neighbors in your group, we ask that you capture those sentiments as well. And then, as I mentioned, when we come back into the large group, we will share some of the key themes. Again, we won't be able to hear from every single group, but we will open up the chat and encourage you to type in other responses so that we can capture that. We will do that process twice, so you will be sent to your breakout rooms twice, and we'll come back and have a little bit of a debrief after that. So in terms of the first couple of questions that we would like you to spend some time on, this is really about understanding your perspective on the current environment in Winston-Salem right now. And so as we send you into your small groups, we ask that you have some conversation about what you view right now as the major challenges facing the Winston-Salem community. We know that we can't talk about current state of the community without referring to the pandemic. And obviously that has had significant impact on so many aspects of our community. And so having some conversation around how specifically the pandemic perhaps has impacted your view of the Winston-Salem community. So with that, Kelsey is going to be magically sending you to breakout rooms. We still have people joining the meeting. And so again, we ask that you offer grace if you end up with some new participants that come in perhaps a little bit late to the conversation. Please welcome them to the conversation. You will have about 15 minutes in your small group, and then we will bring you all back as part of the large group. And several of us will be floating around in and out of the breakout rooms to provide any assistance as necessary. So we hope you enjoy your conversations. I hope you had some good conversations. I was able to pop in and hear a little bit of each of them. But now we want to hear some of the key themes that your groups discussed. And I'll ask if perhaps a spokesperson from the group can hit the, under the reactions, hit the raise hand button so we know who some of the spokespeople are. And we'd be interested in hearing just in a couple of words what some of the key challenges are that your group discussed. And we want to be sensitive to time. And if there are other ideas that your group had that you don't get a chance to say out loud, please put them in the chat because we will be copying the chat. I see Tammy's hand. Tammy.
So, hi, everyone. Some of the things that we came up in our group were educational disparities. And then another thing was the beautification, the aesthetics, and specifically since I live downtown, that I'm concerned about that. We also had the concern, or the challenge rather, of the lack of clear vision for the city, where we're going, what is our purpose. Pandemic effects, particularly, you know, live entertainment and how we've not been able to experience that, and artists in general having a lack of ability to make a living, it seems like. You know, of course, there's always been concern about our restaurants and bars and their ability to sustain through all of this, and certainly how our aesthetics of the city in general affect the ability to attract new business. So those were some of the things that we came up with.
Great. Thanks, Tammy. And I'll ask, we don't need to repeat them, but if there are new items that weren't already discussed, we please ask you to share those. Next, I see Sheila.
Yes, our group also mentioned issues around living in food deserts, or the unavailability of healthy food options or restaurants or grocery stores in neighborhoods. And then the difficulty physically getting there, like public transportation doesn't go from some neighborhoods to where there is a grocery store. So it's health around, food deserts, and then transportation. And then we also talked about not enough affordable housing available, and development is making less and less housing available, and that there's a inequitable distribution of tax revenue, and there should be more benefit to those communities that need it more, where there are boarded up houses and there are opportunities to renovate homes for people who need housing. Eviction was also on the list too, which has been made worse during the pandemic. And also someone mentioned making sure that we are treating fairly and appropriately compensating those who work for the city, those people who pick up recycling and trash and other city services.
Great. Thanks, Sheila. Elise.
So I was the scribe for our group, not necessarily the spokesperson. One of the new challenges that our group identified was transparency and communication about city spending, both during the pandemic, which had some new spending programs, but also plans for future budgeting. And there's some questions about some recent business decisions and some real estate that the city has had to take responsibility for. Another, I think, theme was around infrastructure, both the condition of infrastructure, such as our streets, but also thinking about our creeks and stormwater system and flooding. Those are big concerns in different parts of the city. And then I think another theme that's new that came up in our group was some of the challenges with communications from the city to residents, and helping folks be able to know what's going on in the city, when meetings are happening, how to get involved, how to track all the different city and county plans. It seems like that's just very difficult for people to manage.
Right. Thank you. Andrew.
Hi. What we were from group 2, and what we talked about, I know that Lisa was writing down notes, but I was also writing some down as well. But some of the things that we talked about were street care as well, and kind of what certain streets, does it fall on Winston-Salem's responsibility? Does it fall on higher government to take care of those, street sweeping, street care, as well as looking at potentially the railway. There's some unused railway throughout Winston-Salem and Forsyth County that if there was a way to either repurpose that, or if there was potentially a plan with that 2045 plan that I think was discussed with Winston-Salem sometime last year. We also went through racial equity, potentially looking at reparations and following some ideas or some plans put forward that maybe Asheville and Durham has done. Also looking at non-discrimination ordinances for the LGBTQ plus community. And finally, we did sort of correspond with looking at funding for parks, looking at scheduling, look at what is behind, when things will be finished, potentially reallocating funds from some city departments to others. And looking specifically, there was some mention of the north side of town, I think Long Creek Park, and there's a golf course up there. Looking at that progress, looking at what has kind of taken place and sort of displacing people, but then how are they going to sort of fix sort of that displacement? So I think that kind of ties into the affordable housing and parks that someone else mentioned as well.
Great. Thank you, Andrew. Lisa?
Andrew just covered our group.
Okay, perfect. He did a good job then.
Yes, he did.
Somebody, JKRAPFEL.
Yes, that's me. Sorry, I'm on my work computer and don't have a camera and don't have a microphone. So a lot of our group conversation revolved around retainment of the talent that comes through the triad. I come from the younger generation. I'll be 35 next week, and love to see what the city is doing and what the city has, but also, kind of do not like seeing the corporations leaving the headquarters, moving to Charlotte or moving to Atlanta or moving to Raleigh. Although that may seem kind of narrow-minded as far as the corporate jobs, I feel like those jobs that those companies produce within the area also lead down to more opportunity. That's another thing we discussed, was that there's kind of two Winston-Salems. There's the Winston-Salem that has thrived over the past few years and really hasn't had that much trouble with the pandemic. And then there's been the other Winston-Salem that has struggled and was struggling before the pandemic. So a lot of our conversation revolved, and if anybody else that was in my group wants to cut in and add their thoughts as well, was that we need to look at better ways of retaining the talent that is in Winston-Salem, that is in High Point, that is in Greensboro as a whole, and get those people to invest their knowledge and their time and their resources into the area. That was pretty much, we didn't really get much to the pandemic. Our conversation was pretty much solely revolving around that. One thing we did bring up was like the flow entrepreneur, I'm not sure what it's called, but the Entrepreneurship Academy or whatnot at 510 Trade Street. I don't think got enough promotion to let people know that this opportunity is out there, no matter where you come from, to follow your dreams, and then hopefully have those kind of companies startups invest in Winston-Salem, and not just build their roots and then move out. So that was the basis of our conversation.
Great, thank you. Michael.
Yes, good evening. Our group has, a pretty varied view, but I think we still came down to the consensus that the organic intelligence of the community has been severely suppressed by the government or the councils, and due to the competitive atmospheres that's been set up, the organizing efforts have really been kind of stifled. And that's like a major challenge that our community is facing. But even more so, I would think that the city is facing the biggest challenge of, being open and receptive to new approaches and being able to hear the true intuitive cry of the people. And the pandemic itself has not necessarily affected my view. And I think the rest of the group said pretty much the same. Some had offered that they see that, the city does allow things to build until it's about to burst, and then come in and have some type of remedy that they administer to it. So that's a bad pattern that we've set. So, now we're looking at how, the community has been long in a high distress situation, and other organizations or other entities that might have taken a less significant hit are really crying out like they're, like they're about to die, you know what I'm saying? But at the same time, we've been under that situation for a long time. So I think that's kind of opened our views up to like, these big organizations out here is not really that tough. And also they're kind of, for lack of a better way to express it, they're kind of wimpy. Like they don't want to take no losses, but we've been taking a lot of losses. So I'm just trying to put it in plain language for people to understand, but that's kind of what I've gathered from my group.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Again, I invite folks to add to the chat. Several have already, and there's some additional items in there. Now, what I want to do is transition the conversation from talking about challenges to what can the city do to help address those challenges that you have been discussing. And so we are going to send you back to those same breakout rooms with two new questions to spend some time talking about. First of all, how can the city support those challenges? What do you believe the city could or should be doing to help address those challenges that your group has been discussing? And certainly there are more challenges and more needs than any organization or any community can necessarily handle from a funding perspective. So if you had to prioritize as you think about addressing those challenges, which are the most important ones to tackle first? And where should the city, in your view, put its resources and its energy? So we will go ahead and send you back to your breakouts. Again, you will have about 15 minutes in your breakout group to discuss those two questions. We ask again, your scribes and recorders did a great job of reporting out, and we ask that they do that again, or if you could flip a coin and find somebody else in the group who may be willing to assist. And when we come back to the large group, we'll have another discussion about each of those questions too. So again, go enjoy those conversations. We hope you enjoyed your conversations in your groups. While you all are joining us, we're just sharing with you on the screen the graphic representation of many of the comments that you all made during the report out from the original questions. It's hard, I know, on Zoom with so many boxes to see what Julie has been doing while you all have been talking. And so we just wanted to make sure that you were able to see that from the first half of our conversation. And now we're going to move into hearing about the conversations that you all had around what role you believe the city should play in helping to address some of the challenges that you mentioned. And so again, I'll invite the spokespersons of the group to raise their hand, and we will call on you again and invite you to share some of the themes of those conversations. Julie will be capturing them. And again, I'll remind you, if there are other thoughts that you have that perhaps are not shared openly, please put them in the chat, because they will certainly become part of the full record of tonight's conversation. So I'm going down the list, and I see Andrew's hand.
Thanks, Michelle. I'm hoping mine won't be too long, but one of the first things that we looked at was whenever we look at voting in midterms, there's always some sort of bond that people vote for, and it's kind of looking at, have those bonds reached a maturity? Have all those resources been allocated? What sort of, purpose can we look at using those bonds for? If it's meant for one area, can we repurpose or reallocate those for another area? As far as maybe city or county, maybe there's taxes or some sort of thing, which I'm sure people may like or not like, but maybe those are ways to support the community. But also, I think there needs to be a lot of congruency with looking at the private sector. There's tons of nonprofits, there's tons of companies that are in Winston-Salem and Forsyth County. And I think someone mentioned last time where, I'm a 31-year-old, and so I'd rather see companies coming into Winston and Forsyth County versus leaving. Whether we try to incentivize by, having different breaks or allowing them to put money forth for certain projects, maybe that's a way to support the Winston-Salem community. But I think one of our big priorities, we're really looking at the racial inequities that are in multiple cities and counties across the state, but are also here in Winston-Salem. Looking at the systemic racism and looking at financial disparity strategically, especially educationally, transportation, building wealth. I mean, all of these things can be connected back towards how cities and counties are built up and how certain disparities benefit or lessen for different communities, and really looking at how that looks. Another thing we talked about was maybe consolidating different departments from a county and a city level. Sometimes you have the same departments on a county level and a city level, and maybe you don't need that separation. Maybe they can be conjoined into one. And looking at potential, how can maybe private landowners or maybe smaller private sector or smaller independent people really make a difference in affordable housing? What sort of benefits can they have access to that can really help this situation as well? Thank you.
Very good.
Thanks, Andrew. And Lisa, I think I saw your hand up too. Was there anything he missed?
No, you actually saw my hand applauding for the graphic.
Got it.
Thank you, Lisa.
Tammy.
Yes. Can you all hear me? Yes. So in our group, we talked about, and I think you guys touched on it, investigate why businesses are leaving Winston-Salem, what attracts them to other cities. You know, and it goes back to, you know, utilizing that young talent that we have here. What attracts them to Raleigh or Charlotte or even Atlanta as opposed to Winston-Salem? So maybe taking a look at that and investigating some funding, some energy into that for sure. Also, public transportation. It's difficult in this city to get from place to place. Sometimes it can take 2 hours to make a 10-minute trip, or, you know, if you're driving a car. So maybe talk about that. Also, better communication. This meeting in general, I only found out about it just accidentally yesterday. I stumbled upon a link on Facebook, and I think some other folks had said in our group that they saw it in the Winston-Salem Journal yesterday. So better communication so that we can get more input, greater diversity of involvement in age, gender, neighbors, whatever. So yeah, that's just some of the things that we came up in our group. Let's see. And then we went back to tapping into our resources. You know, we have some really talented folks in this community. So if we spend more time in trying to better communicate, then we would get a greater involvement.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
I'd like to add that we also talked about we can't control the big companies coming here, or if they want to leave, leaving. But what we can control is look and see what makes Winston-Salem special. What are the assets or the treasures, the community organizations, and find out what they need and communicate that so that everybody in the community can pitch in and help them, as well as get our city and county to do what they can to strengthen what we have and strengthen the way that we tell the stories about what we have. And if we do a better job at that, people will stay here and people will want to come.
Great. Thank you. Emily.
Yes. Okay. I wasn't sure if you could see my typing in request for a hand raise. One of the things that we focused on before was systemic inequalities, and a couple of the ideas we had were to help strengthen the neighborhood organizations, for the council to spend time and money to support them and provide training if that's needed. Not necessarily to continue relying on the same private organizations that haven't necessarily been getting things done if they've been around for a long time and aren't achieving their goals. Most people did seem to want better oversight of community funding, of where it's coming from, and to make sure that it's really getting spent on something local in the communities where it's needed. There was a lot of the superficial fix-up on Patterson came up several times, both in the last discussion and in this discussion, which included issues of gentrification and the fact that it's now sort of being priced out of being something that people in the neighborhood would actually be able to purchase and invest in. There was also the idea that Winston-Salem used to be more innovative and perhaps needed to invest more time in smaller programs for trial runs than trying to use like huge, big projects at once. It was also mentioned that there used to be a liaison between the police and social services that helped out in neighborhoods. This was someone's grandmother, I believe, had mentioned that to them before. So this was kind of a long time in the past. And also transportation came up for us too, that buses aren't really going where the jobs are necessarily. So maybe the bus routes need to be addressed, and the transfers and the time it takes to get somewhere on city public transportation. I think that is most of what we discussed. If anyone wants to add anything else.
Great, thanks, Emily. Elise.
So many good things already said, so I'll try to be specific with ours. With respect to prioritizing affordable housing as a way to address homelessness and housing insecurity, our group really thought that better accountability in terms of who is receiving incentives for providing affordable housing and what their actual delivery of the affordable housing is, and what the cost to residents are. So ensuring a better return on investment for local residents. Also thinking perhaps more strategically about how the city uses its existing real estate, including vacant properties, thinking about using that property for public uses, perhaps being a little bit more careful with who is allowed to purchase those properties and what they're going to be using it for. In terms of economic mobility, our group felt pretty strongly about putting the money towards actual poverty reduction and following through on initiatives that have been identified in past studies, such as the reports from the Poverty Task Force. So less studying and more actual actions. Investing in people is also related to that. So helping to develop skills locally that will appeal to businesses instead of sort of the other way around. And then last, being more proactive about infrastructure maintenance instead of waiting until things fail, and perhaps thinking about how to pursue federal and state dollars to address those infrastructure issues.
Thanks, Elise. Melisha.
Thank you, Melisha.
Melisha.
Two things that our group talked about that I'll just emphasize that weren't brought up was someone mentioned more oversight on how city resources are being spent, but specifically we talked about impact evaluations. So there are a number of organizations that are funded by the city that have been funded for a number of years, and there is not necessarily any accountability as to whether or not those organizations are actually making a difference in the issues that they're addressing. So not only thinking about the number of people served, but an impact. Are they making a difference? Are people continuing to remain dependent on services, or are they providing opportunities for people to move out of situations where they are continue to be dependent on those organizations? The other challenge with that is because there are a number of organizations that have been funded for a number of years, it does not leave any room for innovation or for new organizations and new opportunities for funding. And so really we've got to be able to hold people accountable. The second thing that we talked about, the other major thing that we talked about, we used education as an example, and there is enough information available about what schools and students need to survive and thrive that we should not put the onus on parents in communities to ask for resources. And that seems to be what's happening in this community, is people are blamed for not having resources because they don't ask for them, when we as a community know what is needed. And there's no reason that we cannot equitably distribute resources as they are needed without waiting for people to ask for it. And so we think that that is another way that the city can help in these efforts. And I don't know if anybody else in my group wants to chime in. I see some comments in the chat, but I don't know if there are others that want to chime in.
Great. Sheila.
Yeah, let's see. Melisha, we had a similar comment from our group on there being folks who are doing work on the ground that have information about sort of what is needed in their communities that aren't connected with committees at the city level. There might be some opportunities to connect community activists or people who are doing the work with city council members. We also had several suggestions around looking at other cities that have had success in addressing some of these problems, even over over the past couple of decades and see what might work here in our community. One person had put as an example a grocery store in a city in Baldwin, Florida, where the city hall opened up a grocery store in a food desert. There was the question of, so a person in our group actually questioned the question of there being, in light of resource constraints, that perhaps there's, wondering about the way in which Wake Forest University does or doesn't benefit financially the city. And are there ways that the university, which seems to have a lot of wealth, could more benefit the city and make resources more available to the city, or paying their hourly wage earners better at Wake Forest? Another comment about making sure we're using resources to retain and train our city employees, like police, fire, and sanitation, so that we could keep them here and have a strong workforce. And someone also commented on sort of what kind of challenges does it present our city, because our top employers are nonprofit corporations or hospitals and universities in our school system. So we might have some sort of built-in problems with tax revenue when that's the situation. There might be some opportunities with the vacant downtown office space. We have a member of our group who says there's 1 million square feet of vacant office space in downtown, and what kind of opportunities does that present? And anyone in our group want to chime in with something I missed, I'd appreciate it.
Great, thank you. And I'm sorry, JKRAPFEL. You said your name last time, and I didn't write it down.
Yeah, it's James. I kind of expected someone else to jump in and comment for our group. She kind of led it. I don't know where she went. I don't see her on the screen right now. But a lot of ours revolved around, in this discussion, revolved around promoting the things that the city is actually doing well, whether that be private or that be public. For instance, I'm sure all of you have seen in the last 2 days that Wake Forest Baptist, the largest employer in the county, has committed to raising their minimum wage to $15 an hour. That's huge. I mean, like I said, it is the largest employer in our county. And then a lot of our conversation just revolved around, we can all come up with these ideas, but how do we get to a point where the companies will do what they need to do to better the area? I did not take notes because she was adamantly taking notes, and I thought she would comment in. So, it's a lot of it revolved around publicizing the things that Winston-Salem does do well, and making it more attractive to the prospective people that are coming out of college, that are here and that need opportunities, or that have opportunities, but they don't know where they're coming from. Because there are those opportunities in the county, in the city, but they're just not known. So like I said, I'm just kind of throwing off the cuff here because I was not taking notes in our last small group. I just didn't see her jut in, but there she is, Christy. You can go ahead and cut in. You were taking notes adamantly, so I'll let you take over from here.
Hi, I'm so sorry, James. We should have communicated more clearly who was going to share. We also touched a little bit more on working more strategically to include all members of the community and the racial and educational inequities that are very prevalent in Winston. We talked about promoting the existing things in the community that are doing well. Forbes magazine recently released the top large employers in the country, and Baptist Hospital was ranked number 18 in the whole nation as the top employer. And that would be a wonderful thing to celebrate. One concern of a member in our group is about accessibility. He takes care of someone who has accessibility needs and is so frustrated with the parking situation that when he attempts to pull into a handicap parking spot or a curbside spot, they're very often taken by people that don't have appropriate signage. And that is something that he is so frustrated with that they're considering moving to a different city where the accessibility is better. And most everything else was touched on.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Christy. And thanks to all of the recorders and scribes from each of the groups. We appreciate your, that's a difficult task to take on, and we appreciate your willingness to do that with your hopefully new friends, but certainly folks that perhaps started the conversation out as strangers to each of you. As we close out today, I will just again thank you all very much for your time, and remind you that if there are other comments that you didn't get a chance to share, there are a lot in the chat right now that we will be including as part of the record. And if there are other things that you haven't had a chance to share, please go ahead and put them in the chat. And we've also included our email address as well too there. And so if you think of something after today, please don't hesitate to email us. We will certainly include that in all of the information that goes to the City Council in preparation for their strategic planning workshop that will be held towards the end of this month. And as we close out tonight,
Michelle, would you put up that graphic that somebody did, please?
Yes. Yep. And so just as we end, I'm going to have Kelsey share Julie's graphic that she was working on this second time. So she did one for the earlier conversation, and then this next one.
Thank you.
So hopefully you all can, there we go, can see that a little bit better, a little bit bigger. And we will be putting together a full culmination of all of the graphics like this from all of these conversations that we've had, as well as we've been taking notes during tonight's conversation, and we will be putting a list of the comments that we have been able to capture into a full report. That will be a public document, and that will be certainly shared through the city with each of you, along with their thanks for your participation this evening. So with that, again, I'll say thank you very much for your time, but we will keep the chat open. And so if there's additional things you would like to add, please feel free to do that. Otherwise, have a great evening.